everyone. If you needed any indication we're doing this live, I feel like that was basically your newspaper right there. Welcome, I am Allison Weins. I know you heard a little bit about my corgi, so every presentation includes a photo of my dog Olive. And we're going to talk about GitHub Codespaces beyond the basics. I'll bet a lot of you are coming from the Welcome to Codespaces talk that my lovely coworkers Matt and Bailey just gave. And if you didn't get a chance to check it out, I highly recommend doing so. In their talk, they gave an amazing tour of what you might do the first time you try out Codespaces. But in this session, I'm going to take you a step deeper into configuration through the dev container, personalization with dot files and settings sync, and why you might use one versus the other, and a few tips from our team. Whether you're trying to get your environment set up with the perfect personalization, or you're a team lead trying to ensure a consistent setup for teammates using Codespaces, by the end of this chat, you're going to be equipped with the knowledge you need to dive deep and get going. So, in case you didn't make it to the Welcome to Codespaces talk, I'm just going to give a quick recap to make sure we're all on the same page here. At its core, GitHub Codespaces is simply a service that provides managed cloud environments on demand, taking you from repo to development environment in a single click. But more than that, we know how important it is for your environment and your editor to feel like home. Matt referenced dot files, settings sync, and more in his demo. And we're going to break down all the different ways you can personalize your Codespace in just a few minutes. And finally, one of the reasons we think Codespaces is so exciting is because it empowers you to develop from anywhere, which, as you heard, is one of my personal missions. Any developer armed with a browser and an internet connection can ship code with Codespaces, and that's what I love about working on it. Okay, so let's talk about what I'm going to talk about. First, we're going to look at 2 ways that you can personalize your Codespace. Then we're going to look at how you can configure your repository for easy, repeatable use by adding a dev container. And finally, I'll share some tips from the team. Just a few tidbits that we like, that we hope you will know. So with that, let's dive in. Personalizing your experience happens through 2 main areas, or configurations, really. You've got your dot files, and you've got settings sync. And one of the questions I hear a lot is, okay, Allison, why would I use one versus the other? Maybe you just noticed that your Codespace is mostly right and you're not quite sure why. We're going to break it down here. So if you're using dot files, we automatically pull any public repo that's on your account named dot files into your Codespace, and we apply them at creation time. So if you perhaps use dot files to set up your local machine, or you checked out some references in the past and forked a dot files repo from a coworker, we're automatically pulling that in. If you haven't been super familiar with dot files, these are pretty much configuration files that start with, as you might guess, a dot. So these might be a dot bash profile, dot alias, dot prompt. These are all ways that you can configure your environment and shell. Now, there's a ton of dot file examples, and you can use those as a starting point in order to be perfectly optimized for you. And the great thing is, although we love to use them in Codespaces for customization, you can also apply them to your local machine. So if you happen to accidentally throw your laptop into a lake during a really tough debugging session, you can always quickly apply those dot files to any new local machine. Then again, it's our hope that you won't ever worry about setting up a local development environment, of course. One thing that's important to know here is that we apply these settings at creation time for your Codespace. So any changes you make to this repo will only be applied to any future created Codespaces. It won't affect any that you've created before that change. Now, that's one way that you might personalize your Codespace, but the other is settings sync. Since GitHub Codespaces leverages Visual Studio Code as its editor, we get to leverage the amazing work that the Visual Studio Code team has done to sync your settings across these Visual Studio Code instances. We keep it on by default because we don't want you to have to think about it, but I'm here to tell you just a little bit of how it works and how you can adjust it to your liking. It syncs things like your UI state, your extensions, your themes, your keyboard shortcuts, and it keeps those all in sync across your code spaces. A key distinction here that I want to make is that with settings sync, any changes you make to the Visual Studio Code editor within your code space will be synced across all of your past, present, future. So if you're kind of mucking around with settings and you're not sure that you want this to apply to everything, be sure to go ahead and turn off settings sync before you do that. And now I can tell you about this all day, but I feel like it's a little bit cooler to show you that it does indeed work the way I'm telling you it works. Let's go ahead and do it. Great. So you can see here, I've got a code space up and running already. This is my Olive tracker. Olive makes appearances as many times as possible in all of my demos. So we've got a theme here with the Mononoke. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go to my simple Hello World application and start up a code space. Now, while we're here, you'll see I don't really have anything installed, only two. Setting sync is on by default. And when this code space finishes running, I guarantee you that we're going to see the same theme applied. And in fact, to make things cooler, I'm going to put it side by side. So as I make changes, you can see that it's happening in real time and there's no funny business behind the scenes. While we're waiting for that to connect, I just wanted to show you a quick example of my dot files here. You'll notice I have these aliases. I love those. They're great. If you want a cool one to try with your own dot files, try this party one. It'll create a nice little in your terminal just for you. So here we have our two code spaces side by side, exactly as we'd expect. And now if I take the one I just created, and I can go ahead and change the theme to Abyss, it's going to take a second. That setting sync is running in the background. And in just a few moments, we'll notice this one change as well. Pretty cool, right? But what's even cooler is I can sync things like my extensions. So for example, if I know that in every single code space, I want to use this prettier code formatter, I can just go ahead and install that. And by default, it's going to sync it. Yes, it's going to sync it right here. And then if we wait over here and give this just a second to run that in the background, you'll see that my prettier code formatter showed up on my other code space as well. So if you've got any of those extensions that you'd really love to have on every single code space, you can use setting sync to ensure that they follow you wherever you go. Now let's talk about configuring your code space. Generally, when you open a repository, if you don't have any special instructions in the dev container that I'll talk about in a second, we leverage a general sandbox to get you started. We try and support, the laundry list of languages in order to support getting as many of you as possible started. And you can see that list here. But if you need a bit of extra configuration, perhaps you have a very specific version of Python you need, you're going to leverage the dev container JSON for configuration. Now, this is a quick sample of what the dev container file might look like. This is purely a configuration file that lets us know how to build the container for your needs. This is great if you're a lead or a maintainer of a repo and you don't want users to have to do anything more than click the Open in Codespace button. Now, important things to note here are that the dev container is actually checked into the repository. And so it is scoped to the repo, not the user. This is why it's great for maintainers of a repository to leverage. No matter who the user is, if they're using this repository, they're just going to click on that Open in Codespace button, and we're going to build it according to the specification that you've checked in. There are a lot of properties that you can use in this configuration file, but what's also great is that you only need to use what you need. You don't have to do every single thing. As you can see in this sample screenshot, we actually have a few of them commented out because we don't need them for this repo. Leverage only what you need and don't worry about anything else. Now, as I mentioned, or as you might see here, we have a set of extensions that you can itemize for the repository as well. And you might be thinking to yourself, okay, Allison, you just showed me how to sync my extensions with setting sync. That was awesome. Why would I also add these extensions to the dev container? That seems like two different ways to make sure that I'm getting the right extensions I need for my development. Well, key distinction there is setting sync is per user. And so you can't guarantee that any person picking up your repo will have the same set of extensions that you might be using. With the dev container and putting the extensions attribute in there, you can ensure that every single person who uses this repository gets this set of extensions installed. And so it's really a way to ensure that everyone has the same experience when they open in a Codespace. So that's the general lay of the land with our dev container. But if you're like me, hearing about a configuration file and actually creating that on my own are two very different things with varying levels of difficulty. So I want to take you through a quick demo of how Visual Studio Code actually helps you create this in case you want to go and build a dev container JSON for yourself right after this talk. So I'm going to bring this full screen here so you can see a little better. As I mentioned before, this is just a very simple hello world application here. And you know, I find with a lot of my prototypes, I start just from scratch and then I want to build it up. And with our add configuration files command, I can do just that. So perhaps now I decide, you know, this repository, I really want it to be a Python project, but I need a very specific version of Python, one that our universal sandbox doesn't support out of the box. So all I do is open up the command palette, and I can do Codespaces add development container for configuration files. You can also do that from your Codespaces pane. So here with Hello World, I can go ahead and add development container config files. And what that's going to do is it's going to open up this great quick pick. It shows me some top options, but I can also show all the definitions. There are a lot, as you see here, because we really want to help you get started fast. And I'm just going to say, let's do a Python 3. And I'm going to do 3.8 because 38 is one of my favorite numbers. Let's hope that's not a security question somewhere. And I'm going to hit OK. And what that's going to do is it's going to automatically generate everything I need to get started with this project as a Python 3.8. You'll notice it's got the list of extensions. It's got some optional attributes here I could uncomment if I wanted. And it's also got settings that'll help make running this code space incredibly easy for anyone else who wants to pick this up. So that looks all great to me. But maybe I also want to go and add that prettier code formatter to this repository. I think everyone should use this extension. All I have to do is right click, and you'll see we have the ability to just add to dev container JSON. And in fact, there it is. So you don't have to search through for exactly how you need to configure this dev container. We do a lot of the early lifting for you to help you get started and experiment rapidly, which I love. Great. So now that we've done that, let's hear just some quick tips from the team. Awesome. So there are 3 things that I personally love doing, and a few of my teammates love too. Did you know that directly from a code space, you can create an issue from the terminal? You might have seen in the keynote that the GitHub CLI is out, and I love the GitHub CLI. I'm so happy that it is installed by default with Codespaces, because if you're like me and you run into a bug, I don't want to have to find which of my 20 tabs I need to open in order to file an issue. And so I can just go straight to my terminal in my code space and do GitHub issue create and go from there. And it's awesome. I don't have to lose any of my context. On that multi-tab problem, I love having my code space in the browser, but every now and then I want to leverage my VS Code desktop installation. And I think Matt showed in his demo that you can actually just open VS Code and you can download the GitHub Codespaces extension, and you can go ahead and create a code space just from there. The tip that I will add on to that is that if you want to suspend your code space, you can do that from the desktop experience. All you need to do is right-click on your code space name, and you can go ahead and suspend just like that. And finally, you can actually open a PR in a code space. We talk a lot about working from that repo page, clicking the code button and open, but I switch back over to my switch back over to my Hello World page here. You'll notice I have a pull request open. And if I go ahead and click on it, I can go ahead and hit this open with and do open in Codespace, which if you want to provide a quick review of a teammate's changes without having to mess up one of your installations, you can just quickly spin up a code space and contribute back to your team that way. I'm sure Kath loves this for the PRs, for her documentation. I know her team has definitely helped me out in that way before. And with that are the big tips from the team. I hope you learned some new things today and you're ready to go off and personalize your code space exactly as you need it. And with that, I'm so excited to take any further questions and super excited to hang out with y'all in the discussions after.
Toggle your screen.
Oh, sorry.